Thanks. Hello, everyone. I'm very excited to be here on this stage talking about this, which doesn't work. Yeah, it works. Talking about this contemporary myth we call cost of living crisis. I know the topic is not so much exciting per se, but our research is. Because in our research, we try to go beyond researching average consumer, average individual in the population, more into researching different consumer segments according to the income they earn. And some segments, such as, for example, low-income consumers, they are often overlooked by the general research, usually undeservingly. And we tried to change this. So in my presentation, I will quickly go through agenda. So first, I will introduce the context, what is cost of living crisis, how it occurred. We'll move on to the questions that were raised in 2022 and followed us throughout the research till 2024, or really ongoing. We'll dig deeper into the methods or approaches we used to answer those questions, and then we will dig deeper into findings or insights which we were able to uncover. I will wrap up this presentation with discussion of the opportunities for the wider business community, so stick with me. No good story starts without prelude, without pre-story, without context. So let's quickly get into the context. And the context is that our story starts in 2022 when we as consumers and businesses, we were all confronted with this poly-crisis environment with numerous global tensions, extreme weather events, with supply chain disruption, literally whatnot, right? And consumers and businesses, we were starting to think, what's next? What next crisis we have to endure? What next crisis we have to get ready to? And this cautiousness and anxiety was, starting to build. And well, guess what? In the second half of 2022, this next crisis occurs in the form of cost of living crisis when inflation runs up to 9% on global basis, and consumer income growth is barely there, barely 2%. And that is actually the definition of cost of living crisis, when inflation is higher than consumer income growth. And in this situation, usually consumers find themselves unable to afford these usual standards of living, and they turn to cautious spending. Only in second half of 2022, it's not turning, but more returning, because it's only 1 year after this great pandemic of 2020, and we are still remembering this uncertainty which lingers to different areas of our life. And during this lingering cautiousness, cautious sentiment, we decided to organize our research into financial constraints and how they affect different consumer segments. So questions we raised in 2022 was mainly were around two core research questions. So first, how do different consumer segments experience cost of living crisis? And two, how do different consumer segments respond to the cost of living crisis? And for the sake of this exercise, we segmented our populations into the 10 equal segments, 10 deciles. Decile 1 representing lowest income consumers, decile up till decile 10 representing the most affluent or the highest income consumers. Now, methodology. For this research, we used mixed method, mixed source research, or what I call jigsaw or puzzle research. We take many sources, you take many methods, pull it all together, and try to paint this 360 picture from different angles, because it's just more efficient. So what we did first we extracted data from official statistics, such as national statistics, such as international organizations, UN, OECD, others, and that gave us enough socio and macroeconomic data to build this cost of living index, cost of living by income index, which is basically a tool showing how different consumer segments experience cost of living squeeze. Now, to gauge the future effect of rising living costs, we used econometric modeling and scenario building. We introduced scenarios such as global stagflation, commodity price hike, China's slowdown, and others to see how consumer segments' expenditure is reacting to different macroeconomic disturbances in the future up to 2040. To answer the question about the different response by the segments, we used a variety of surveys. The largest of it, Voice of the Consumer Lifestyle Survey. It spanned across 17 geographies. More than 17,000 of respondents were asked about their attitudes, about their habits, how they are changing, particularly towards the inflation, particularly towards the cost of a living squeeze. To leave no stone unturned, we also organized the voice of the industry or business or the survey of business professionals and leaders, where we aim to see how businesses see the situation, how they see their consumers, clients reacting, what strategies are evolving in this due to this cautiousness in short, medium, or even in the long run. And finally, the final bullet point here is our trying to capture the moment at the beginning of the cost of living crisis through social listening and web tracking tools. So some drum roll moment here. What did we find? So to answer first question about different experience of different segments in different populations, we researched more than 100 countries across the globe. And in 66% of the cases, we found that lowest earning households bear the highest impact of rising living costs. And those included countries such as the UK, Germany, Poland, also China and India, also Mexico and Brazil, literally so many countries. Meaning there was no correlation whatsoever between the size of the market, between development level of the market, or where that market is situated. Now, in some economies, such as the US, such as Spain, we saw that middle-income households were the ones bearing the highest impact from rising living costs, and in 29% of the cases, or well, roughly 1 in 3 of the countries, it was highest earning households or most affluent households that quantitatively bared the highest impact from rising living costs. So it's quite fair to say that cost of living crisis impact is not uniform. It's not uniform across the segments, across geographies. But one interesting finding, one interesting insight we uncovered was that spending patterns were pretty good in determining the level of impact. And in this slide, you can see the consumer expenditure of households in decile 1, lowest income households in the UK. And as you can see, essential spending, spending on housing, spending on food and drinks, these categories constitute a large portion, actually more than 50% of decile 1 budgets in the UK in 2023. And that portion of budget, it's more or less consistent across the past 10 years. Now, another factor which we saw over the research period was that housing prices in the UK went up by 21%, food and drinks prices by 33%. So those two factors combined, a high portion spent on essentials and rapidly rising prices, those two combined made households in decile 1 in the UK most vulnerable to the cost of living squeeze. And on the contrary, households in decile 10, or most affluent households, although they also endured similar inflation levels, they spent only 25% of their budgets on housing, on essential goods, so they were comparatively much more resistant. So that's about the first question. Moving on to the response. To organize our findings to the second question, or how do different segments respond to the cost of living crisis, we decided to use response stages to financial distress model developed by Hamilton Griškevičius, and I mention him because he's from Lithuania, so I'm a Lithuanian, he's Lithuanian, and other colleagues. So basically it goes as follows. First, consumers are confronted by spending limitations. Of course, this prompts a reaction of quickly reassessing their spending habits. And as they do that, they develop those temporary coping techniques, which are logically either increasing the income sources, which is definitely not so easy to do, or more logically redistributing their spending into categories that matter to them. As time goes by, pretty quickly, consumers tend to make those temporary coping techniques into the permanent ones and adapt to the new reality in which we are living now. So, step by step, react. To illustrate this step, we used our social listening findings. The exercise we held at the second half of 2022. And the findings were quite revealing, meaning that there were so many negative emotions floating on social media. Negative emotions such as fear, such as disgust, such as sadness, fatigue, and all those evolved around such keywords as economy, energy. In fact, energy, food, and drinks, those three spending categories that yielded the largest number of negative emotions across the geographies. 76% of total negative emotions in the UK, negative responses in the UK, and 93% of total negative responses in the US evolved around food, drinks, and energy. Now, what's the difference? In countries where middle-income households were the ones suffering from the highest level of rising living costs, such as the US, we saw a lot of consumers blaming the government. Let's say, so there were so many negative emotions and negative responses flying in the direction of the president, of the White House. Meanwhile, in the countries where low-income consumers suffered from the highest rise in living costs, such as UK, such as India, we saw social responses more or less concentrated on practicalities. How to save on groceries, how to find alternative uses for some products, how to save on energy, and etc. So this actually brings me to the second stage, or coping techniques. Starting to reveal the highlights from our survey. So we held first consumer survey in late 2022, and already then we saw that consumers across segments, across the geographies, they were cutting. 55% of the low-income consumers, 53% of the middle ones, and 38% of the most affluent consumers said that they are already decreasing their discretionary spending, particularly on categories of leisure, recreation, dining out, and as you can see, one of the core strategies, coping strategies, became cooking at home, particularly in countries such as the UK and South Korea. Other strategies included decrease energy use. In Netherlands and Germany, the strategy was particularly popular, and yet other strategies included switching to more affordable goods, such as switching to private label, buying smaller quantities, repairing broken items, or renting instead of buying. And Polish consumers were actually the leaders in those strategies. I think Lithuanians too. So, and in some geographies, such as South Korea, we saw high interest of consumers in distributing their costs across a longer period, and that is basically buying by installments. Yes. Adaptation. So the third stage, adaptation. We held our survey across 3 years, 22, 23, 24. And in 2024, we saw that consumers were much more optimistic about their health, about their the happiness, about their finances, literally about everything. But at the same time, in 2024, we saw that many consumers retained their concern about everyday expenses, them being high or still rising in a short period. In other words, this cautious sentiment, cautious spending became sticky across the years. It also became sticky across segments and across geographies. And what I mean by that is that even those countries and even those consumer segments that did not suffer from the cost of living squeeze, so they were lucky enough to see their income growing faster than the prices, even those started to spend their money in more cautious way. They started to consume in more conscious and more selective way, and they were more engaged in this mega trend we call pursuit of value, where consumer is looking for affordability along with other lists of values such as quality, durability, sustainability, positive emotions, and others. Looking into the future, into our econometric analysis, which combines spending patterns, consumer income projections, and macroeconomic conditions, we see that rising living costs impact disparity increases in the future, particularly because cost of living crisis sharpened the income inequality and broadened income gap between the consumers, lowest income consumers, and the highest income consumers, and this gap is still growing. This discussion of the future brings me to discussion of the opportunities, but first of all, I would like to reiterate what I have been talking before. It's true that in 2 in 3 cases, highest impact of cost of living is borne by low-income consumers, whereas high-income consumers, most affluent consumers, are less impacted. But in some cases, in countries such as Australia, Canada, United Arab Emirates, Egypt, and so many other countries, the impact of the cost of living on affluent consumers, for example, might be unexpected. It is true that when facing uncertainty, consumers cut, but they do not cut across the board, across all categories. They pick and choose where to cut, and they evaluate their purchases, actually purchasing packages in terms of goods and services. They purchase in terms of communication and marketing strategies, in terms of shopping journey. They evaluate all of this according to this new list of values, so it's not only about affordability. And this brings me to the kind of conclusion that opportunities exist even in unfavorable environment. Some opportunities, they are segment related, such as, for example, we expect that by 2040, top 10% of US consumers will more than double their spending on education, whereas the lowest income consumers in the US will spend, well, only 1% more during the same period. Some opportunities, they are more mainstream, such as we expect that food and drinks, health and wellness, those will be the fastest growing categories, spending categories over the next 15-ish years. Across the world. And some opportunities, I would say many more opportunities, lie in shifting consumer behavior and this pursuit of value. And this is much more complicated because businesses have to work on so many levels and adhere to so many values consumers are requiring them. However, looking at this conference and overall convo going on globally, I see that technology, automation, digitalization, new channels, and many other technologies, they are here to help. And that is what I wanted to say to you today. Thank you.